European leaders expressing some growing frustration with the Trump administration over the weekend at a conference in Munich, Germany. Some of the leaders were still stinging from Vice President J.D. Vance's calls for them to end censorship and how the Trump administration plans to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. But there was a lot happening over the weekend, a lot of action. National correspondent Mike Carter joins us live right now from West Palm Beach, where we know the president reacted to the latest out of Europe and also got in some downtime there with those NASCAR fans.
Yeah, he certainly did, Bianca. Happy President's Day weekend, everyone. Look, President Trump spent much of the weekend at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, but just a week after attending the Super Bowl in New Orleans, President Trump attending yet another iconic American sports venue, this time the Daytona 500. Just a few hours drive north of Mar-a-Lago, Trump greeting drivers ahead of the race and even taking a very literal victory lap in the Beast before the race. Yet another iconic moment in what has already been a historic presidency, now just 1 month into office. Pretty cool images there. Well, while the president was having a little fun this weekend, his administration remaining hard at work. Vice President J.D. Vance appearing at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend. The core focus of the gathering originally intended to be the war in Ukraine, but the vice president used much of his time to excoriate Europe's leaders, calling them out for embracing censorship, open borders, and, quote, retreating from their fundamental values.
While the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Now, one of the values Vance touched on was religious freedom in Europe, which he believes is under attack. Vance listing off recent examples of Christians being jailed for peaceful protests in Sweden, Scotland, and England, calling out leaders in Germany and Belgium for censoring right-wing journalists and politicians. Well, the reaction to Vance's comments? Critical to lukewarm at best. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz speaking the following day, saying his country would not accept advice from outsiders on how to run their democracy. Germany's chancellor accusing Vance of meddling in European elections and encouraging the rise of far-right, supposedly neo-Nazi political parties. Well, President Trump reacting to Vance's speech over the weekend as European leaders begin gathering today in France for an emergency summit on Ukraine after the White House announced it was opening talks with Russia on ending the war without a European presence.
I heard his speech, and he talked about freedom of speech, and I think it's true in Europe. It's losing. They're losing their wonderful right of freedom of speech. I see it. I mean, I thought he made a very good speech, actually, a very brilliant speech. Yeah. Europe has to be careful. And he talked about immigration. And Europe has a big immigration problem. Just take a look at what's happened with crime.
European leaders are now scrambling to get a seat at the table in the peace talks between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. And on the heels of Trump's phone call with Vladimir Putin last week and news that Trump will soon be meeting with Putin face-to-face, European leaders are concerned that Trump will broker a peace deal without their input. Well, meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for peace talks to begin with Russian officials. Now, on Friday, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, met with Vice President Vance. However, and as you mentioned, Bianca, he will be arriving. Zelensky will be in Saudi Arabia later this week. But Zelensky said Ukraine is not invited to be part of these peace negotiations between U.S. and Russia. So in the past, Ukraine has said no peace negotiations would be tolerated by Ukraine unless Kyiv was directly involved. We'll have to wait to see how this unfolds later this week. Bianca?